A halo of light surrounded the Andrea Doria's grand ballroom as Robert's team established their undersea camp. Power cables snaked between their parked submersibles, feeding lamps that pierced the Stygian gloom. As excitement still tingled through his veins from their first harrowing dive, Robert began delegating tasks. Alexei, check the subs for damage. Remy and Fatima start scanning the ballroom with the drones. Look for points of structural weakness. Nods answered him as the crew set to work. Robert joined Jasmine beside a glowing monitor, displaying the ballroom's dimensions. We've got a lot of ground to cover, said Robert. Where do you think we should investigate first? Jasmine brushed back her dark curly hair, eyes alight. The first-class cabins. That's where the real treasure will be. My thoughts exactly. Robert squeezed her shoulder. Take Hamish and start scanning the upper decks. We'll join you shortly. As Jasmine and Hamish piloted their drones upward, Robert knelt beside a large crate. He smiled, running a hand over the titanium casing. Time to wake up, Genesis, he murmured. With a hiss of depressurization, the crate opened to reveal a sophisticated underwater drone. Unlike the others, Genesis was equipped with advanced sensors and AI capable of autonomous investigation. Robert had spent years developing her, waiting for this moment. Begin mapping the wreck, he commanded. Genesis chirped an affirmation and undulated into the gloom. Robert's grin broadened. No secrets would remain hidden from her. A few hours later, Robert guided his sub through a jagged rend in the hull towards Jasmine and Hamish's location. Their excitement was palpable over the radio. You've got to see this, Robert. The staterooms are perfectly preserved. It's like a snapshot back in time. Robert drifted into a corridor lined with ornate doors. Breaching one cabin, he gasped. Silt-caked furniture and tapestries were untouched, as if waiting for long-departed passengers to return. Priceless artworks hung alongside vintage luggage and clothing. Robert imagined the elegant travelers romancing to live jazz or gathered in the lounge for cocktails, oblivious to their doomed vessel's fate. This is incredible, he breathed. Great work, you two. Let's collect some artifacts for conservation. I have a feeling there are even bigger revelations ahead. Days passed in a blur of adrenaline-fueled dives. Each cabin unlocked fresh marvels, jewelry, sculptures, antique furniture. The time capsule quality fascinated Robert, even as it filled him with longing for the human stories obliterated on that tragic night. Late one evening, Robert sifted through relics in the cramped galley while rain pattered the sub's hull. A deep rumble jolted him upright. "What was that?" came Alexei's panicked voice over the radio. Before Robert could reply, another tremor shook the wreck, dislodging clouds of silt. "Seismic activity," Robert replied. "We probably triggered a pressure shift. Return to camp for assessment." Back in the ballroom, the quakes continued as the crew exchanged nervous looks. Robert was examining drone footage when he glimpsed something that stole his breath. Near the bow lay a massive shape, shrouded in drifting sediment. Something about its contours rang familiar. "Genesis, investigate those coordinates," Robert ordered. "Look for points of entry." "You think that thing's hollow?" asked Jasmine. "One way to find out. Can you feel it, team? Our biggest revelation is close." Robert barely slept that night, too wired with anticipation. At first light, he was maneuvering through bowels of the ruptured hull toward the anomaly's location. His pulse quickened as the shape loomed from the gloom. It was the fossilized skull of a massive creature, encased in the buried bow. Jagged teeth large as Robert's sub framed an elongated snout. He could scarcely fathom the size of the beast. "My God," Robert whispered. "It can't be." But deep down, he knew. They had discovered the ancient remains of a kaiju. For decades, such titans were considered myths or misinterpretations of fossils. Yet, here was incontrovertible proof. Robert imagined the leviathan patrolling primordial seas, an apex predator without equal. What had felled this magnificent creature to its bony grave? I scarcely had time to process the implications before chaos erupted. The seismic vibrations intensified, fracturing the encasing ribs like glass. Sediment cascaded as the skeleton's massive skull shifted. Robert threw his sub in reverse as the jaws yawned wider, exposing an entrance into the cranial cavity. Hard hammering, he maneuvered inside. His searchlights revealed cavernous chambers picking clean by scavengers. Vertebrae and pillars of bone supported the outer walls. It was a cathedral of remains. "Jasmine, Hamish, get in here," Robert yelled over the radio. "You've got to see this." As the others took turn exploring the fossilized behemoth, elation dueled with disbelief. They had scored the paleontological find of the century. Once word got out, the world would beat a path to their doorstep. Robert was preparing samples when a horrendous groan resonated through the skull. The vibrations were worsening. "She's going to collapse," he shouted. "Full power to camp now." They blasted through disintegrating bone and crumbling passages back towards the ballroom. Robert gripped his controls in white-knuckled terror as the deafening cracks reached a crescendo. Genesis shot past his viewscreen, berthed safely amongst their equipment. Behind her, the tunnels they had navigated minutes before imploded in a choking cloud of debris. Robert checked each ashen face in turn as they clung together in the quaking ballroom. Miraculously, they were all unharmed. He managed a brittle smile. "I'd say we got out just in time." Their celebration was jubilant but brief. There was much to do. Extensive scans of their discovery, crating artifacts for transport, calculating logistics for storing the Kaiju remains. Days later, Robert stood triumphantly before a UN assembly in New York. The world gazed in awe at his team's historic find. He concluded his presentation to thunderous applause. "My friends, today we stand at the dawn of a new era of discovery. What other secrets remain buried in the deep, waiting to reshape our understanding? With continued unity and cooperation, we can uncover them together." As the cheers echoed through the vast chamber, Robert shared smiles with his crew. Their journey was just beginning. After years, his vision and perseverance had finally yielded something extraordinary. A bold new future lay ahead. Gazing out the assembly hall's towering windows, Robert imagined the Kaiju's ancient bones enshrined in a place of honor. The world would never be the same. Beneath the glimmering facade of an exclusive Parisian gala, whispered rumors spread like wildfire through the crowd. The wealthy patrons feigned nonchalance even as their covert glances betrayed a shared fixation. The Kaiju. Amongst the glittering ball gowns and crisp tuxedos, Robert navigated countless queries about his team's astounding discovery. His practiced replies flowed smoothly as champagne, though his smile never reached his eyes. Their historic find had ignited public obsession beyond imagination. Robert longed to slip backstage for a reprieve, but his presence was in high demand. Since the UN announcement, innumerable figures of wealth and influence had extended invitations to the explorers who had rewritten history. To these elite socialites, the colossal fossil was a curiosity to marvel at between glasses of champagne, Robert thought bitterly. They could not fathom the implications. As midnight approached, he finally extracted himself to a deserted balcony overlooking Paris's glittering skyline. The cool night air was a balm after the cloying heat of so many adoring bodies. For a rare moment, Robert stood alone with his racing thoughts. Everything had changed in mere weeks. Their discovery had rocked the scientific community to its core, igniting fierce debate. Many decried it as an elaborate hoax. Those acknowledging its validity could scarcely agree on the appropriate course forward. But murmurs of something far more ominous had also reached Robert's ear. Rumors that the Kaiju's unearthing had awoken ancient powers, long dormant. He had tried to dismiss these as fanciful gossip, yet disquiet clung to his heart. Robert was roused from his brooding by two men who strode onto the balcony, one speaking urgently in hushed tones. "The sacred eye demands access to the relics. Our resources are substantial, Mr. Kramer, and our influence vast. Name your price." The man named Kramer bristled, his patrician features taut. "The fossils will remain under government purview, period. I will not see humanity's history looted for profit. Before more could transpire, a new voice cut through the night. There you are. Been looking all over. Jasmine glided onto the balcony, slipping her arm through Robert's. Her smile faltered briefly as she took in the scene. Kramer straightened his tie. We were just discussing the dinosaur exhibition at the Paris Museum of Natural History. Well, enjoy the evening. He and his cohort hastily departed. Jasmine watched them go. Didn't mean to interrupt. Nothing worth hearing, trust me. Robert leaned against the balustrade with a weary sigh. Can we steal away soon? I'm knackered. Jasmine's hand settled warmly on his. Once Hamish is done regaling the crowd with the drone dogfight story, you know they can't get enough. They shared a rueful chuckle. As Robert gazed out at the cityscape, he felt Jasmine studying his face. You did magnificently tonight. I know these pageants tax you, but they are necessary for now. Once furor over the fossil subsides, we can fade back into blissful research obscurity. Her tone turned playful. Who knows? Maybe you'll even crack a genuine smile someday. Robert clasped her hand gratefully. No matter the chaos, Jasmine's composure and wisdom were unshakable. As the night wind tousled her elegant updo, Robert was struck by her beauty, internally and externally. They had forged a deep bond over long years of adversity and achievement. Nearing the pinnacle of their shared dream, Robert felt poised on the cusp of something more. Their tender moment was severed by the bells of Notre Dame ringing midnight. Jasmine chuckled softly. The magic hour has arrived. We'd best collect Hamish before he transforms back into Scottish form. No need, lassie. I'm right here. The burly diving chief emerged onto the balcony, grinning triumphantly. Just had a fascinating chinwag with the Sheikh's son about ROVs. Keen young lad. Now what say we blow this popsicle stand? Laughing, they slipped through opulent halls towards the exit. Robert felt reasonably anonymous behind his tuxedo and mask. Yet he sensed scrutiny clinging to them as they exited into the balmy Paris night. Was it just his frayed nerves? He shook off the shiver crawling up his spine. Soon they were holed up in their hotel suite, collapsing onto plush sofas. Room service had provided champagne, truffles, and an enormous charcuterie platter at Robert's request. I suppose this will do, Hamish joked, popping a truffle into his mouth. They eagerly stripped off formal wear and slipped into sweats. While nibbling from the platter, their conversation meandered from the night's highlights to the fossil's mind-boggling origins. Just imagine that colossal creature roaming the primordial seas, hunted by nothing, mused Jasmine. Apex predator indeed, Robert agreed, though clearly something ultimately proved superior. He rose to gaze out the window, pensively swirling his champagne flute. His reflection stared back, shoulders burdened. Rapt audience notwithstanding, I almost envy Gordon right now. Excavating dinosaur bones in the Gobi Desert seems a respite from all this. No fanfare, just dirt and discovery. Jasmine appeared beside him, slipping her arm around his waist. The furor will fade. For now, let's focus on the extraordinary thing we've given the world. Who knows what revelations lie ahead? Comforted, Robert nodded. After exchanging warm goodnights, he retreated to his bedroom. Sliding beneath Italian silk sheets, he sent up a silent prayer of thanks for having Jasmine and Hamish by his side. Yet, as he teetered on the cusp of sleep, Robert heard a strange susurration, like chanting. When he rushed onto the balcony to investigate, he found only deserted streets. With the city lights dancing behind his eyelids, he finally slipped into slumber. The next weeks passed in a whirlwind of interviews, public appearances, and think tank discussions about the fossil's implications. Robert and the crew found themselves celebrities of a very peculiar sort, their lives defined by a colossal skull dredged from the deep ocean. Following a lightning round of meetings at CERN to discuss carbon isotope dating of the bones, Robert finally carved out time to video call his old university mentor, Professor Abrams. The gray-bearded scholar's delight was palpable. "Robert, my boy, what a magnificent coup. You've set the world aflame. We must discuss classifications over dinner upon your return." His approving grin lifted Robert's spirits considerably. But as they delved into theories about the creature's taxonomy and the sediment composition surrounding its remains, Robert sensed a shift in the professor's demeanor. "Robert, I am hearing concerning whispers from colleagues worldwide about long-dormant societies who apparently worshipped these beasts in antiquity. This resurrection of ancient myths is deeply troubling to me." Robert hesitated, then confided his own unsettling encounters. Abrams tugged his beard, frowning. "I advise utmost caution, Robert. Fanaticism festers where proof intersects faith. Your find may give rise to forces viewing the fossil as more than mere scientific significance." He leaned closer. "Should you require counsel, my door is always open." After they signed off, Robert sat lost in thought, champagne untouched. All his life, the pursuit of scientific truth had been his lodestar, illuminating the darkness of ignorance. But suddenly he felt adrift in strange tides, the sea itself shifting beneath his keel. That night, Robert dreamed of a vast subterranean temple lit by flames. Dozens of shadowy figures knelt before an altar where ancient symbols had been daubed in ochre. As discordant chanting echoed from the stone walls, the high priest raised a gleaming black chalice over the altar. When he turned to face Robert, flames danced in the empty pits of his eyes. Robert jolted awake with a pounding heart, covered in icy sweat. Darkness engulfed his hotel room. Had the chanting followed him from dream to waking? He rushed onto the balcony, but only night's silence greeted him. Shaken, he crept back under the covers. Perhaps this toil without respite was taking a deeper toll than he realized. He resolved to do better at ignoring baseless rumors and wild speculations. The winter sun had not yet crested the horizon when frantic pounding on his door shocked Robert from slumber. He threw it open to find Jasmine and Hamish wide-eyed and still in their nightclothes. "Robert," cried Jasmine, "something terrible has happened." Heart-thudding, he ushered them inside. Jasmine pulled up a news article, hands trembling. Robert's chest tightened as he scanned the news article over Jasmine's shoulder. "Massive explosion destroys Kaiju laboratory." The meticulously secured facility in Zurich had been utterly decimated just hours ago, reducing months of priceless research to smoldering rubble. Shockwaves rippled through the scientific community. "How could this happen?" Robert murmured, raking a hand through his hair. "That lab was a fortress." "Perhaps not impregnable enough," Hamish rumbled gravely. Jasmine shook her head, visibly distraught. "First the break-in at the museum. Now this. Someone is targeting institutions connected to the fossil." Robert rose to pace the room, his mind racing. Powerful forces seemed intent on suppressing knowledge surrounding the Kaiju. But to what end? Before he could voice this, Alexei rushed into the suite wild-eyed, the other crew members on his heels. "Robert, have you seen the news?" "We were just discussing it," said Jasmine. "Please tell us you all are unharmed." The team quickly confirmed they were physically well, though shaken. As they clustered around the glowing monitor, the article's implications sank like a stone in Robert's gut. This attack was clearly a warning. More violence was inevitable if Kaiju research continued. But backing down would mean sacrificing everything he and his team had worked toward. Hamish broke the uneasy silence. "I say we increase security, but remain undeterred. These cowards feed on fear. We mustn't give them that satisfaction." Murmurs of assent rippled through the crew. Robert felt a swell of pride. Regardless of the growing danger, their dedication never wavered. "You're right, we stay the course," Robert said, but discreetly. "If a spotlight only paints targets on our backs, we fade into the background for now." The crew nodded, exchanging resolute looks. They would press on, even if only in the shadows. Over the next weeks, Robert observed mounting anxiety within the scientific community. Those connected to Kaiju research operated under a pall of dread, knowing that the faceless saboteurs remained at large. Rumors swirled regarding the attacker's identity, but nothing substantial ever came to light. Like ghosts, they struck without warning, then vanished without a trace. Meanwhile, Robert and his team quietly arranged the fossil's covert transport to a secure, undisclosed location. New lab facilities materialized, furnished with equipment smuggled in piecemeal to avoid attention. Despite ubiquitous tension and fatigue, morale remained high. They had weathered worse trials before. Late one evening, Robert sat scrutinizing sample scans he had ordered from the new lab, searching for anomalies. Anything to deepen insight into the Kaiju's mysteries. He leaned closer, as something peculiar in the skeletal tissue caught his eye. There appeared to be faint dendritic structures within the marrow, spanning microscopic gaps, almost like neural networks. "Jasmine, look at this," he urged. "Am I seeing things, or could these resemble neurological traces?" Peering at the image, Jasmine's delicate brow furrowed. "It certainly seems like the remnants of neurological architecture permeating the bones." She met Robert's wide-eyed gaze. "If we're right, even in death, this creature's remains may retain a residue of its consciousness." A hushed excitement bloomed between them. Neither dared voice the fantastic implications. Over the following weeks, Robert's team conducted exhaustive scans searching for further evidence of the neural structures. Though degraded by time, the filigree traces clearly interconnected throughout the massive fossil. The patterns were undoubtedly biological and bore striking resemblance to a neural matrix. With this breakthrough, new avenues of inquiry opened before them. Perhaps deeper analysis could extract some residual echo of the ancient Titan's psyche, records of its existence through prehistory, even a comprehension of its innermost nature. Of course, Robert knew such notions strayed beyond science into the realm of conjecture. Some might call it madness. Yet he could not silence that alluring prospect, glimpsing through the creature's ancient eyes. Hamish proved an invaluable skeptic, keeping flights of fancy grounded. "No use getting ahead of ourselves," he often interjected gruffly. "One step at a time." Meanwhile, news trickled in of fresh attacks at research facilities overseas. Each chilling report fueled Robert's motivation to push ahead defiantly. Someone clearly feared what unlocking the Kaiju's secrets could reveal. On an evening otherwise unmarked, Robert sat analyzing scans when an anomaly caught his eye. Strange, oscillating signals pulsing through the neural lattice. Calling Jasmine over, he asked if she saw it too. "Yes, it almost looks like waveforms," she said slowly. Robert's pulse quickened. "Like neuromagnetic signals," he added. "Residual memories or personality imprints. If we could decode them somehow." Their eyes met with electric excitement. Perhaps the long silent beast still carried echoes of its consciousness, encoded within the marrow. With enough study, its memories could speak again. From there, each day brought remarkable discoveries. Robert and Jasmine took charge, analyzing the waveform's patterns, searching methodically for meaning. The others eagerly provided support, morale soaring with this revolutionary research. Robert often awoke from vivid dreams of the ancient past. So visceral he wondered if the Kaiju's memories bled into his sleeping mind. So far they had decoded fragments depicting the creature swimming through lightless oceanic trenches, hunting titanic squids. Was he truly glimpsing its experiences millennia ago? Imagination or insight? The lines blurred more each day. Yet beyond thrilling scientific exploration, the dangers facing them still loomed. Ominous incidents continued, drawing nearer in proximity. Then came a quiet night, when it struck home. Alarms blared Robert from sleep. Dashing into the hall, half-dressed, he nearly collided with Alexei. "Fire on a lower level," Alexei panted. "Hurry!" Smoke already permeated the stairwells as they rushed downward. Choking and coughing, They beheld roaring flames consuming a section of labs. Frantic researchers battled to suppress the inferno. Hamish burst onto the chaotic scene, face blackened with soot. The blaze started in an unused storeroom. "Deliberate arson," he growled. Ashen shock gripped Robert. Violence had breached their supposedly impenetrable refuge, leaving nowhere safe. How long until more than property was destroyed? Clenching his fists, he committed to another course. He would find whoever coveted the fossil's power and turn the tables. In the days following, Robert informed only his most trusted allies of his plan. Using themselves as bait, they would lure the covert forces into the open. It was a tremendous risk, but Robert had run out of alternatives. "I don't like involving the rest of the team without their knowledge," Jasmine said gravely. Robert nodded, hating the subterfuge, but seeing no other options. Soon, Robert and Hamish departed overseas, transmitting reports of a major discovery back to base. A message to tempt hidden ears. Once at their foreign destination, Robert established contact with a local police chief on the intelligence agency's payroll. Under cover of night, they prepared an ambush at the laboratory. Now they only had to spring the trap. The chance came days later, when an unmarked van pulled up beside the quiet building. Robert's breath stalled as dark figures emerged, faces obscured. The group converged on a side entrance, preparing explosives. On Robert's signal, officers swarmed from concealment, forces surrounding the building. But the attackers had come prepared. Moving with lethal precision, they laid down, suppressing fire. Robert's ears rang as he cowered behind a vehicle for cover, bullets ricocheting around him. Through the smoke-filled chaos, he glimpsed several assailants break away and take flight. The chief barked orders for his own men to give chase. Leaving the rest of the shootout in capable hands, Robert and Hamish joined the pursuit. Their targets could not get away this time. The two plunged into the night, trailing the chief's men at a distance. The staccato crack of gunfire echoed ahead, receding into warehouse districts near the docks. There, the trail went cold. The assailants vanished like ghosts. Catching up to the officers, Robert demanded, "Where did they go?" Before anyone could respond, a tremendous roar split the air. An airplane engine. Robert looked skyward in time to glimpse a private jet soaring off over the water. Robert slammed a fist against brick in frustration. Outmaneuvered again. Their adversaries always seemed to remain one step ahead. For now. "Back to the lab," Robert said. "We have sleeper agents to uncover." Upon their return, a thorough sweep revealed 3 undercover infiltrators among the staff, confessing only to the mysterious sacred eye before taking cyanide. Robert slowly came back to consciousness, his mind foggy and vision blurred. As his surroundings clarified, he realized he was in the medical bay, an IV tethering him to a monitor softly beeping. How did he get here? Memories filtered back. He had been decoding neural waveforms with Jasmine when an intense pounding seized his skull. Pressure built behind his eyes until he cried out, collapsing as the world went dark. Now Jasmine sat vigil at his bedside, relief flooding her face as he stirred. "Welcome back," she said gently. "Gave us quite a fright passing out like that. The doctors aren't sure what caused it." Robert slowly sat up, rubbing his temples. The pain had receded to a dull ache. "I feel all right now. Just overwhelmed, I guess." Yet disquiet gnawed at him. He recalled the waveform fragment he had been analyzing when agony overwhelmed him. A vivid scene of the ancient Kaiju, locked in fierce combat with a hideous, multi-armed behemoth in the ink-black depths. Robert had experienced the Titan's rage and pain as its own before losing consciousness. Jasmine clasped his hand reassuringly. "I know how obsessed you've been lately. Once the doctors clear you, perhaps you should take a break." Robert nodded reluctantly. As much as it pained him, she was right. He had been pushing himself to the brink of exhaustion. The Kaiju's memories were simply too potent to absorb continually. He needed balance. After discharge, Robert took Jasmine's advice and spent a week indulging hobbies ignored during his fervent research. Reading favorite novels, cooking elaborate meals, playing chess with Hamish late into the night. He felt his edge gradually dulling, his overstimulated mind returning to calm. But a growing disquiet lingered, questions he needed answers to. There were patterns in the waveforms he had barely begun to grasp, clues whispering just out of hearing. One cloudy afternoon, Robert decided to visit the fossil vault which housed the section of cranium they scanned constantly. He moved through sterile halls, still bustling with researchers, until he reached the towering steel door and entered his key code. The massive portal slid open with a hiss. There lay the severed head in its protective cradle, 2 stories of rugged bone towering over Robert. Unease trickled down his spine. Had the cavernous eye sockets always been so watchful? As he stepped closer, cobwebs of neural light bloomed across the skull's domed surface, accompanied by a resonant hum. Robert's breath caught. The scan equipment wasn't even active. What was this phantom luminescence? Without thinking, he reached out to touch the bone. The gentle contact triggered an explosion of images behind his eyes. Prostrated humans adorned in primitive jewelry, rendered in ghostly monochrome. Robert recognized the headdresses from books on ancient cults. More visions slammed through his mind, accompanied by a funerary chant in a language predating any Robert knew. He glimpsed an endless procession bearing sarcophagi, each entombed relic pulsing with eldritch energy. With a gasp, Robert broke contact, severing the mental deluge. He staggered back, heart hammering as the visions rapidly faded. What had he witnessed? Hallucination or long-buried truth? In following days, Robert became increasingly troubled by security footage, showing him standing motionless before the fossil for nearly 15 minutes, though it had felt like mere seconds. Was he losing his tenuous grip on reality? He knew he should confide in Jasmine, but shame held his tongue. After her repeated warnings about obsession, this would only confirm her worst fears. He resolved to pull back from research entirely until his equilibrium was restored. Yet that night, his sleep was plagued by surreal, Dali-esque landscapes populated by figures in ritual garb, warping geometry and non-Euclidean structures that hurt the eye, and colossal idols that left Robert awestruck with terror. He awoke with relief, until noticing glyphs etched into the bedside table that had not been there the night before. Crawling out of bed, Robert discovered more symbols carved into the walls, their alien contours all too familiar. Over the following weeks, such eerie episodes increased, plunging Robert's life into a disorienting swirl of waking nightmare and elusive truth. No conscious effort could repress the mounting visions. Medication only worsened them. Research samples and footage that previously yielded breakthroughs now appeared scrambled beyond meaning. Robert's grasp on the external world frayed as he sank deeper into the Kaiju's hypnotic inner reality, a fathomless ocean he could no longer surface from. When he failed to appear for scheduled meetings, Jasmine came looking. She discovered Robert delirious in a trance, having gouged intricate sigils over every inch of his quarter's walls. Dark blood caked his nails and fingertips. With Hamish's help, Jasmine brought Robert to the medical wing, disheveled and incoherent. Sedation was required to pacify his erratic fugue. As the drugs took hold and Robert's eyes drifted shut, Jasmine squeezed his hand, blinking back tears. Her dearest friend was slipping away, one layer of his psyche peeled off at a time. Soon only an ancient alien consciousness might remain. She knew drastic action was the only hope of reversing this consuming metamorphosis. Jasmine ordered all neurological waveform research indefinitely suspended. The team's drives must return to Robert, anchored in human connection. She only prayed it would not be too little too late. The week of Robert's sedation gave Jasmine time to refine her plan. Daily visits to the medical ward confirmed the bizarre symbols still appeared on walls and monitors when he was unsupervised. suggesting an unconscious compulsion. She had to somehow shock his mind back into coherence. The afternoon Robert was discharged, Jasmine invited him to her quarters for tea. He accepted the offer with detachment, seeming more adrift from his own life than ever. Jasmine steeled herself, then began. "Robert, I cannot bear seeing you fade away from us when a cure may still be within reach," she said gently. "But we must face this affliction at its root. Will you trust me?" Robert gave a faint nod, eyes slipping in and out of focus. Heart pounding, Jasmine retrieved a small ornate box from her desk and placed it before him. He stared without reaction. Jasmine opened the lid, revealing a glittering obsidian disc engraved with alien glyphs. She had confiscated it from the medical ward days ago. "I believe this artifact provides a conduit to the consciousness overtaking you. To excise its grasp, you must guide me through deciphering its meaning." Robert's detached gaze focused on the disc, recognition kindling in his eyes. Jasmine saw with relief that she had pierced his catatonia. Grasping his hand, she began guiding him through, interpreting the intricate symbols. Step by step, he seemed to regain self-awareness. After hours of relentless immersion in the ancient language, Robert blinked hard, comprehension flooding back fully. Awareness of his harrowing accession dawned at last. With joy and sorrow mingling, he met Jasmine's tearful smile. "Thank you for staying with me in the darkness," Robert whispered hoarsely. Jasmine squeezed his hand. "I will never leave you. Your mind is your own now. The light in you has prevailed." In time, Robert made a full recovery. The haunting visions faded completely. With Jasmine's loving support, he rediscovered the simple joys of being alive, present, and human. Their profound bond flourished in the weeks following, like exotic orchids nourished by scattered rain in the desert. And each night, when Robert laid down alone, peaceful sleep welcomed him under her gentle wing. Robert raked a hand through his hair, steadying his breath. Another vivid dream, like the earth-shaking footsteps of some colossal being stalking through his slumber. Since the fossil's unearthing, such nightmares had plagued him. Jasmine's voice spoke gently behind him. "The dreams again?" Robert turned with an apologetic look. "I'm sorry for waking you. I know it's been months, but I can't seem to leave it all behind." "There's nothing to apologize for." She joined him at the railing, slipping her hand into his. The sea breeze stirred her silk robe as they gazed out across the glittering waters. "It still feels so real," Robert continued after a moment. "Like some ancient presence is trying to reach out across the ages. Irrational, I know." "Not necessarily. We witness things beyond rational explanation." Jasmine cradled his face, meeting his eyes. "But it's behind us now. Whatever mysteries the fossil holds, they are for others to unravel." Robert nodded, covering her hand with his own. How could he explain the persistent sense of a cosmic thread connecting him to the Kaiju across time, that he had become entangled in something far greater than himself? But Jasmine was right. The acuity of sensation was beginning to fade. He simply needed more time away from that tumultuous world. Robert kissed her tenderly. "Thank you for the reality check, as always. Let's get back to bed." Hand in hand, they returned to drift into untroubled sleep, the roar of the sea their lullaby. Dawn's light found them lingering over coffee on the veranda. "Another postcard from Hamish," Jasmine said, scanning the photo of a tropical beach. "He seems to be thriving since the sabbatical." "Who knows? Maybe we should join him," Robert chuckled, "though I think one retired Scot on permanent holiday is plenty." Their quiet musings were interrupted by Jasmine's ringing cell phone. She moved away to answer it, her brow creasing. After several terse exchanges, she returned. "That was a Johnny. There's been some concerning seismic activity back home requiring my geophysics expertise. I'm afraid I must cut our holiday short." Robert sat back heavily, unease coiling in his gut. "Seismic activity? Can it wait?" I'm afraid not, but I should only be gone a week or two. She squeezed his shoulder. Use the time to relax and clear your head. When I return, we'll sail the Greek Isles like we planned. Though reluctant, Robert acquiesced. They spent the day preparing for her departure before parting at the villa door, with a lingering kiss. Watching the taxi disappear down the winding road, Robert tried to ignore his creeping disquiet. It was probably nothing. Alone in the villa, Robert idled the hours with his favorite sci-fi novels, losing himself in their sweeping tales. He video-called Hamish to exchange exuberant recollections about recent adventures, cooking sumptuous meals, reading on the veranda, swimming in the glittering sea. Robert enjoyed simple pleasures forgotten during the chaos surrounding the Kaiju. But at night, troubling dreams recurred. He walked through the vast fossil vault which had once housed the Kaiju bones, but it stood empty, eerily abandoned. Everything was blanketed in centuries of thick dust. No traces remained of their monumental discovery or its radical impact on human knowledge. It was as if none of it had ever existed. The thought filled Robert with an inconsolable sense of loss, but also the uncanny feeling he was being watched. Shaking off the lingering unease, Robert decided to indulge in the local village's market and cafe. Meandering through jewel-toned stalls and fragrant carts lifted his spirits. The vivid sights and sounds of life calmed his restless mind. He lingered over coffee and pastries, chatting with locals about Mediterranean history. By the time he hiked back to the Villa laden with cheeses and fresh fish, Robert felt immersed in tranquil bliss. That evening, he savored a glass of wine out on the veranda, looking forward to Jasmine's return. All the troubling dreams and premonitions of late seemed silly now. What did he have to worry about in paradise? As if in response, the first tremor rumbled up through the stones. Robert froze, pulse racing as the villa creaked. Glasses rattled in distant kitchen cabinets. The quaking intensified, then ceased as abruptly as it began. Robert rushed inside to turn on the news. A startled broadcaster was announcing the largest earthquake ever recorded had originated deep in the Atlantic Ocean. Giant swells were already radiating outwards from the epicenter. Tsunami warnings were now in effect for the eastern seaboard. Dread knotted Robert's gut. What had they awakened in the ocean's lightless depths? Sleep eluded him that night, as aftershocks periodically shook the villa. Under the veneer of paradise, the planet's primordial powers were stirring, and Jasmine was out there, in the midst of it all. Robert itched to contact her, but restrained himself. She would be busy coordinating disaster response. When the violent juddering finally roused him from fitful slumber just before dawn, Robert knew immediately something was different. This was no aftershock. An awful sound was welling up from the depths of the earth, building like a drowned leviathan groaning after eons of petrified sleep. The glass doors of the veranda rattled in their frames. Flocks of startled birds erupted from trees. From the nearby village, Robert heard panicked screaming. The unearthly resonance swelled into a plane-shaking roar, accompanied by violent tremors. Robert dropped to his knees as the villa lurched and swayed. Anything not bolted down crashed to the floor, shattered into debris. Robert scrabbled for cover in a doorway as the deafening vibrations reached an apocalyptic climax. Then suddenly, silence. The quaking ceased, leaving a profound quiet in its wake. Crawling over rubble from the collapsed roof, Robert staggered out onto what remained of the veranda. In the distance, a massive plum of ash and smoke climbed miles into the sky, blotting out the sunrise. The volcano on the neighboring island had finally blown its top. Shaken, Robert fumbled for his phone and managed to reach Jasmine. Though frantic and out of breath, her voice was a relief. She and the team were coordinating evacuations, but the death toll was already catastrophic. The Kaiju fossil chamber had collapsed in the initial quake. All its eons-old contents were tragically lost. As Jasmine prepared to sign off, Robert stopped her. "Wait, what aren't you telling me?" She hesitated. "Robert, the seismographs detected something else in the ocean trench deeps. Movement, and there was a sound, almost like a roar," Robert finished grimly. Cold fear coursed through his veins. They clung to each other's voice, a lifeline through the chaos. Whatever trials lay ahead, they would face together. Mere words could not express the bond between two souls who had gazed into deepest antiquity and scarcely lived to tell of it. But as the call ended, Robert gazed out over the smoldering island and could not ignore the dreadful intuition kindling inside him. The shattered ruins of paradise whispered a warning, one far more ancient than man, that some things should remain undisturbed in their eternal rest. Robert gazed out the rain-streaked window of the creaking fishing vessel, the stormy North Atlantic heaving all around them. He could scarcely believe only weeks had passed since that ominous call with Jasmine. Events continued escalating at a disorienting pace. When the harsh clang of the door resonated through the cramped cabin, Robert flinched. A broad-shouldered deckhand stepped in, rain slick on his oilskin coat. "Captain says we'll be arriving within the hour. Best get yourself ready." With that gruff statement, he withdrew, leaving Robert to wrestle with his roiling thoughts. This desperate journey to a remote corner of the world was likely folly, but Robert had run out of alternatives for unraveling the dark enigma looming before humanity. Ever since the earthquakes and volcanism started, ominous incidents had multiplied. Entire coastal regions submerged under freak tidal waves. Bizarre atmospheric phenomena explored by hysterical media. And the dispersed but relentless fanaticism carried out in the name of something called the Sacred Eye. Robert shuddered as a vision flashed through his mind. A shadowy ceremony in a torch-lit cavern, robed figures chanting before an effigy. Despite Jasmine's objections, he realized these disturbing episodes correlated with significant events related to the Kaiju. Its secrets held the key to the growing worldwide chaos. Rubbing his bleary eyes, Robert turned from the window. He began leafing through the stack of faded documents he had relentlessly pursued over previous weeks, transcripts of elusive oral traditions passed down for generations, obscure allusions in arcane texts, a path of breadcrumbs leading to this uncharted isle, reputedly haunted by primeval secrets. If his deductions were correct, a mysterious sect devoted to the Kaiju prophecy still endured here, jealously guarding their ancient knowledge. This remnant oral tradition, tracing back to forgotten cataclysms, might contain revelation critical to the current crisis. Of course, that assumed Robert could even gain access to them. An outsider caught trespassing would likely face grim penalties. But he had to try. Time was running out. Donning his raincoat, Robert steeled himself and climbed onto the pitching deck. Through the sea spray, he glimpsed their destination looming out of the roiling mist, a sheer cliff face on which perched an imposing stone fortress, centuries old but remarkably intact. This was it. No turning back now. As the vessel dropped anchor offshore, Robert descended into a skiff that carried him through pounding surf to a narrow inlet guarded by soaring cliffs. Scrambling onto slick rocks, he oriented himself and began ascending steep trails overgrown from disuse. Thunder echoed overhead. Reaching the fortress after an arduous climb, Robert circled its exterior, searching for an entry point. Lightning periodically illuminated small windows high in the imposing walls. Someone clearly still resided here. Rounding a corner, Robert discovered a small breach where crumbling masonry provided handholds. Heart pounding, he clambered up and slipped through the gap into a gloomy interior passage. Now, to find whoever dwelt within this citadel before they found him. Robert prowled silent corridors and chambers seeming centuries old but diligently maintained. Strange, unearthly cries echoed intermittently through the fortress, their origin indeterminable. He was nearing the central chapel when hurried footsteps approached. Robert ducked into an alcove, scarcely daring to breathe as a figure hastened by. It was an elderly man in humble robes, his bald head and hands completely tattooed with alien glyphs and symbols. After the man had passed, Robert continued on, his sense of trespassing intensifying. Edging open the heavy door into the sanctuary, Robert gasped aloud. The expansive, domed hall was dominated by a towering statue of the Kaiju carved from obsidian, looming protectively over a stone altar in its shadow. Strange hieroglyphs adorned the walls, flickering in the light of fragrant fires. So engrossed was he that Robert never heard the robed figures enter silently behind him until a hand clamped upon his shoulder. "What business have you in this sacred place, trespasser?" demanded a cold voice. Robert turned slowly to behold the speaker, an imposing man, likely the head priest. His piercing eyes and the glyphs covering his shaven head left no doubt regarding his role. Robert's fate likely rested in his hands. Bowing his head deferentially, Robert responded, "Forgive my intrusion, wise one. I have traveled far, guided by whispers of your order. We share a sacred trust, safeguarding knowledge of the prophecy." The priest's eyes narrowed. "Few outsiders know of that which you speak. Explain yourself." With utmost humility, Robert recounted his discovery of the Kaiju and the calamities that had followed. Though wary, the priest listened intently, his beard twitching. "Yours is a grave tale. If true, your arrival here is no chance event. The creature stirs, and the prophecy's hour approaches." He searched Robert's face. "Come, you must speak more of this with the abbot." The head priest escorted Robert through silent moonlit cloisters to an elegant chamber where pored over scrolls by candlelight. Looking up, the wizened abbot greeted Robert graciously. The two holy men exchanged glances laden with portent. "Brother Bartholomew, I have grave revelations to share if you will hear them." The abbot smiled kindly, his eyes bright with interest. "Speak, my son. Any wisdom sought in good faith is welcome here." All through that night, Robert recounted his astonishing tale in full. The discovery of the Kaiju, the inexplicable incidents thereafter, and his desperate need to comprehend the prophecy before global disaster struck. Both men listened raptly, occasionally exchanging phrases in an archaic language, and as dawnlight seeped into the chamber, the abbot leaned back, stroking his wispy beard. "A remarkable odyssey, my friend. Your arrival here is no accident. The wheels of destiny are turning. But grasping the prophecy requires spiritual preparation. Are you willing?" Robert nodded eagerly. "I will do whatever it takes." And so Robert's grueling tutelage commenced. Weeks of meditation, prayer, translations of abstruse tablets in the Order's archives, repetition of mantras invoking ancient powers whispered down through generations, nightly ceremonies before the Kaiju idol, striving to attune Robert's mind to its consciousness. Meanwhile, dire news continued flowing in from across the globe. The stars and planets aligning in unprecedented configurations, seismic upheaval, social disintegration, as if the world held its breath, anticipating some unfathomable event. At last the night came when Robert stood alone before the abbot in candlelight, prepared to receive full revelation. The old man drew a gnarled wand and traced an intricate symbol in the air, speaking words that chilled Robert's blood. The chamber fell away into infinite darkness. Then Robert glimpsed figures shambling in lines, heads bowed, an endless procession of the dreamlike damned locked in shadow. A great trembling commenced deep below, resonating through Robert's bones as a silhouette swelled on the horizon, angular limbs stretching skyward, mountainous wings unfurling. When the titanic horned head crested into view, blazing eyes piercing his soul, Robert understood at last. The ordained hour was at hand. All the portents had aligned, and the sleeper beneath the waves was rousing. The visions evaporated, leaving Robert on his knees before the abbot, who studied him solemnly. Now you comprehend the purpose written in the stars. The beast rises to sift wheat from chaff. Such is the cycle of ages. Cold dread flooded Robert's heart. There must be a way to prevent this, but the abbot only smiled sadly. What is written cannot be unwritten. We each have our role, little though we understand it. Go with grace. Weary resignation haunted Robert as he descended the cliff trail toward the waiting vessel, wind and rain stinging his face. In the dark, churning waters, leviathan shapes seemed to twist and coil just beneath the surface. Somehow he would convey this revelation, that humanity might spiritually prepare. But inwardly, an icy void yawned. For what could mortal hands do to stay the apocalypse foretold by the stars? As the cliff shrank into the storm-veiled distance, Robert closed his eyes and sent a silent prayer into the howling abyss. Not for himself, but for those he held dear, that they would find solace together before the end. Robert scarcely remembered the ocean passage back, lost in a fog of dread and revelations still reverberating through his psyche. But the sight of his team's concerned faces upon his return jarred him to alertness. There was little time for explanations. The signs were aggregating. Action must be taken. After hurried preparations, Robert gathered his inner circle in the facility's most secure conference room. His haggard features belied the urgency in his voice. My friends, I have returned with dire knowledge about the forces mobilizing against us. This mysterious, sacred eye is far more dangerous than we reckoned. A resurgent cult devoted to the prophecy of the Kaiju's awakening. Robert recounted his meeting with the monks and the visions he had glimpsed. Jasmine clasped his hand when he revealed the apocalyptic events foretold. If there is any hope to avert this, we must grasp the nuances of their obscure traditions and identify their strongholds. Robert's tone hardened with conviction. I propose a recovery operation to obtain documents from their fortified island temple. With greater insights into their beliefs, we can strategically obstruct their ambitions. His daring strategy was met with mingled awe and unease as the implications sank in. Hamish broke the tense silence. Playing with fire, Robert. These fanatics won't take kindly to us raiding their nest. Robert nodded gravely. I'm under no illusions regarding the danger, but we are running out of options. If any objects speak now. He was greeted by resolute faces and silence. Their course was set, into the very heart of Shadow. In the weeks that followed, Robert spearheaded plans for the impending mission. Codename Aegis. Diagrams and 3D models of the cliffside fortress took shape as Jasmine handled logistics and equipment. The goal was surgical: infiltrate swiftly under cover of night, locate the archives, and extract a small crate of documents before exfiltrating. Their window of opportunity was rapidly shrinking as global tensions escalated. The Sacred Eye's brazen strikes against nuclear facilities compelled an emergency UN summit, even while freak cyclones and animal die-offs multiplied. Society's fragile web strained near breaking. On the eve of deployment, Robert shared a private moment with Jasmine on an isolated balcony. The stars gleamed with unusual intensity. Are we fools to even attempt fate's course? Robert murmured. Often it feels we are caught up in cosmic machinations far beyond us. Jasmine took his hands, meeting his eyes. Whatever comes, we face together. If light still remains for us to shed, even flickering, we must persist. Some burden seemed to lift from Robert's spirit as he held her close. No words needed. At last the night wrapped around them, and a sleek vessel bore the team out of the harbor. Running lights doused. Robert stood on the bridge, scanning the ink-black seas ahead. The crew, silent as ghosts, behind him. Their target awaited, half-shrouded in mist. An hour before dawn they arrived offshore. The fortress perched high above like a watchful dragon. Infiltration gear donned, Robert and 3 crew boarded a raft bearing muffled oars, avoiding any engine noise. The would-be thieves slipped through the swirling night toward their prize. They disembarked in a secluded cove and scaled the cliffside by starlight. Nearing the top, Robert's honed senses detected a perimeter sentry pacing the ramparts above. He signaled a halt, scarcely daring to breathe as they flattened themselves into crevices. Only when the guard passed did they crest the cliff top and creep to the same crumbling gap Robert had used previously. Hamish kept watch outside while the others slipped through into musty darkness. Guiding by memory and instinct, Robert led them silently through the maze of corridors and galleries. His heart hammered as he peered into the main chapel and glimpsed moonlight gleaming off the idol's obsidian scales. This sanctum must remain undisturbed. Some profound intuition drew Robert toward a small, unassuming door. The roughness of the hewn timber set it apart from other well-crafted portals. Within, they found a cluttered scriptorium filled with cubbyholes of crumbling scrolls. "Jackpot," Robert whispered. By the glow of hooded flashlights, they swiftly examined documents, selecting the most esoteric. Jasmine handled each fraying parchment with delicate care as she placed them in the padded crate. They were nearly done when a cry of alarm rang out, followed by commotion in the halls. Their presence had been detected. "They'll blockade the exits," Robert hissed. "We'll have to fight our way clear." Scrambling noises at the doorway sent them plunging under the massive table, just as robed men burst in bearing torch and blade. Robert's blood turned to ice as they ransacked every corner, drawing nearer the table where his team sheltered. He slid a knife from its sheath, praying the end would be quick. Suddenly, the room erupted in concussive blasts, flashes briefly illuminating the monks crumpling to the floor. Before Robert could blink, a tactical squad in night gear appeared, silenced guns smoking. British accents barked urgent orders. "You're coming with us now." Robert found himself hauled to his feet and propelled down corridors, his dazed crew in tow. The elite soldiers moved with flawless precision, neutralizing resistance. Within minutes, the team spilled out a side gate into a canyon, just as the sun crested the ragged peaks. Still in shock, Robert turned to their rescuer. "Who are you?" The man shouldered his weapon. "MI6, we caught wind of your plans and have been monitoring the situation closely. Once it went kinetic, we executed an emergency extract." "You were spying on us?" Robert said indignantly. "Surveillance only, with your best interest at heart. The Crown takes a highly vested interest in all matters pertaining to the Kaiju." The agent extended a hand. "Commander Lansing, at your service. Now allow us to ferry you safely home." Wary, but gratified, Robert accepted. As they descended toward the ship, the commander made conversation. "Impressed by your courage confronting these occult fanatics, old chap. We may have further need of your exploits." In his polished accent, the casual mention sent a chill through Robert. What exactly had they stumbled into? Debriefing back at the base was exhaustive. The documents were scrutinized and added to a rapidly expanding database. Robert observed new analysts joining the staff, a fresh wave of technology arriving. Clearly, covert forces were marshalling here for an elusive end he could not yet grasp. Several days later, Robert was summoned to a conference room where Commander Lansing and his retinue awaited around a gleaming table. "Capital job acquiring those documents," Lansing began jovially. "Our experts are elucidating critical intelligence from them regarding the Sacred Eye and its designs." His smile faded. "However, as recent events dictate more invasive interventions, these fanatics are growing dangerously unchecked. We are now authorized to take all necessary measures to neutralize them as a threat." Robert straightened at the ominous tone. "What exactly are you proposing?" "Nothing so crude as decapitation strikes," Lansing laughed. "Far more elegant to infiltrate, disrupt, and misdirect. Our strategists are formulating plans to seed their ranks with double agents to sow confusion, intercept resources, and divert efforts away from population centers." He leaned forward, eyes glinting. "We require the assistance of members of your team. Their familiarity would make them priceless assets for this." Robert recoiled, a cold anger kindling. I refuse to manipulate my people's trust for your espionage games. The commander's face hardened. Grave eventualities hang in the balance here, old chap. Some eggs must be cracked for humanity's preservation. Silence fell. Robert met the cold stare levelly. I think we're finished here. We'll pursue our own investigations. He stood calmly, hoping the sweat beating his neck wasn't conspicuous as he maintained an impassive mask. Relief flooded him once the doors closed behind his departure, but deep unease remained. Clearly, he had crossed a Rubicon with powerful forces accustomed to getting their way. In the menacing quiet of the following weeks, Robert wondered if his defiance had only played into the enemy's hands. The grand struggle seemed poised at a precipice, the next decisive moves impossible to predict. Reports filtered in of the rapid militarization of governments worldwide and further crackdowns on civil liberties, all under auspices of combating the terrorist cult. The hidden hand continued spinning its web in darkness. When the obsidian-tipped arrow embedded itself in Robert's desk, pinning a blood-red scroll, the message was explicit. Become a puppet on tangled strings, or else be cut loose entirely. The stench of scorched rubble still lingered as Robert surveyed the demolished laboratory wing, fists clenched at his sides. This latest attack had been the most brazen yet, coordinated to inflict maximum destruction while avoiding casualties. A warning shot across the bow. While cleanup crews sifted debris in hazmat suits, Robert convened his inner circle in a secure room. Their faces reflected the same grim knowledge. The enemy was tightening the noose. Robert activated the shimmering projection table, bringing up images of global calamity spiraling since the Kaiju's unearthing. These are no isolated incidents, but stage setting by sinister hands. The prophesied hour draws nigh. He took a steadying breath. I don't know what endgame the shadowy powers have engineered, but there must be those who oppose them. Tell me, in your areas of expertise, what unconventional options exist? Any glimpse of light in this darkness, no matter how faint? His plea kindled a spark of defiance in their eyes. One by one, his team offered strange rumors and esoteric theories, investigated but set aside over the years. Fringe notions suddenly worth reconsidering. Jasmine cleared her throat. I've examined accounts of a reclusive order of seers on a remote Pacific island, capable of deciphering alien scripts. They may have insight into the prophecies. I have contacts in the Hindu occult, said Ajani. Legends speak of temples guarding ancient technologies able to manipulate ley lines and vortices. Some indigenous shamans revere kaiju spirits, Nadine added. Their ancestral wisdom could prove an oracle. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. However slim the chances, fresh perspectives were their only hope of pivoting fate's trajectory. They had nothing left to lose. In the weeks that followed, Robert dispersed his crew to the far corners, pursuing every lead in whisper. He knew not where the branching paths led, only that stagnation equaled defeat. Late one restless night, Robert ascended to a deserted tower roof overlooking the sleeping city, a bottle of whiskey in hand. He slumped against the parapet's cool stone, listlessly watching aircraft blink across the sky. How many others out there were unwittingly living on borrowed time? At a shooting star's brief flash, Robert closed his eyes. Give me guidance, he whispered into blackness. I cannot shoulder this burden alone. No divine counsel materialized, only the breeze's lonely sigh. When Robert opened his eyes, he glimpsed the aurora borealis blossoming overhead, curtains of ethereal light dancing silently above the oblivious metropolis. In that moment's grace, the weight on Robert's shoulders seemed to lessen. The cosmos wheeled on beyond earthly struggles, timeless and unknowable. Man's ignorance only imagined life's mystery could be tamed. Reinvigorated, Robert pulled out his phone to organize astronomers worldwide, aiming their lenses at the heavens. Perhaps the sky itself held portents written in starlight. No path would be left unwalked. Weeks later, Robert stood breathless before a room of muted screens, each displaying raw feeds from different observatories. Jasmine slipped her hand into his as the clock counted down the seconds. "Synchronized scans complete," came the radioed announcement. "Collating imagery now." The disparate images flickered, then settled into a cohesive mosaic, a glimpse of cosmos both familiar and alien. Robert squeezed Jasmine's hand, hardly daring to hope. But there, sprawled across unfamiliar stars and galaxies, was unmistakable evidence of colossal architecture and engineering on an interstellar scale. Vast machines harnessing the energies of black holes and pulsars, bending space and time to inscrutable purpose. "My God," Jasmine whispered. "It's a blueprint of cosmic design." Euphoria warred with unease as the magnitude sank in. Mankind were but motes in a mind-bendingly complex cosmos. But Robert realized with crystalline clarity that the enemy's hourglass only measured time on this fleck of dust. Beyond Earth hung eternity. "Our true battleground is the human soul," Robert declared to his team later. "The enemy manipulates fear and ignorance. Our task is to counter with courage and human dignity." In the days that followed, Robert led the outfitting of a cargo ship for a mission of deliverance even he barely comprehended. Volunteers manned the vessel bound for a tiny Pacific atoll, pinpointed by the sky-scouring telescopes. If the Seer's sanctuary existed, they would unlock its secrets. Standing at the railing beside Jasmine, as land shrank into twilight's embrace, Robert was surprised to feel only calm purpose, the night wind caressing his face. Since glimpsing the infinite, Earth's horizons had expanded exponentially. 2 mornings later, cries from the lookout sent Robert and Jasmine racing to the prow as an island materialized out of blue infinity. Small figures waved excitedly from white sands fringed with palm. Had Providence truly guided them? A launch ferried them ashore, where an aged man draped in fragrant leis greeted them warmly. "I am Hokulele," he said. "The ancestors whispered of your coming." Blind, yet he regarded them with eyes brimming with spirit. While crew set up equipment on the beach, Hokulele guided Robert and Jasmine along rainforest trails to the pinnacle of a volcanic cone, sharing the island's history and myths. Ancient chants seemed woven into bird calls echoing through the emerald canopy. They arrived at a stone temple, aglow with orchid blooms, perched cliffside overlooking endless ocean. Within its cool shadows, Hokulele lit a brazier of fragrant oils that cast sinuous patterns of smoke. Settling cross-legged before its translucent coils, he motioned for his guests to do the same. Hokulele began to chant in a lyrical tongue as yet unknown to Robert or Jasmine, body swaying like a sea palm in rhythm with his hypnotic voice. The wisps of scented smoke assumed forms, endless spirals, cycling vortices, intricately turning geometries. Each shift resonated through Robert's core. Time slipped its moorings as Hokulele wove strains of ancient insight with sitar strings. Secrets sealed for epochs dissolved into epiphany, until Robert grasped that the cosmos is one, an eternal dance between order and chaos. All divisions are illusion. When Hokulele's chanting faded, the brazier had burned to embers. Robert's head swam like breaking surface after long underwater. Had minutes, hours, or eons passed? The old man smiled beatifically. As a weaver glimpses the pattern in each thread, now you can read the tapestry. But greater trials await. He embraced them both. You are children of earth and starfire. Face the darkness with aloha. Back aboard ship, Robert and Jasmine struggled to convey their mystical glimpses into language and data. But understanding rested closer to music than words. They had become conduits, intermediaries between earthly and cosmic realms. The return voyage was delayed by violent storms battering the Pacific, tides and currents wildly askew. But Robert felt only calm, watching each cyclone spin past their battered ship. He sensed now the tempest's hid design, not chaos. Upon reaching port, Robert gathered his inner circle close in an earnest embrace, heart brimming. We stand at destiny's crossroads. Events will unfold as they must, but bonded by love, we walk with wisdom greater than worlds. No matter the storm, dawn would break, light endures. A fever dream haunted Robert's restless slumber. Tidal waves swallowing cities whole, earthquakes splintering continents as the people screamed and ran. But the heavens remained coldly indifferent, onlookers to mankind's end. He awoke with the dread sense of a closing interval, a winding down. Wordlessly, his team made preparations, hardened for what was coming. They would together withstand the seeming apocalypse or share oblivion. When the terrible day finally dawned, clear and pristine, Robert stood on the shore with Jasmine, awaiting destiny's call. The team had deployed to key cities around the globe, coordinating with allies made along their strange odyssey. If events could still pivot even by fractions, they would strain sinew and bone trying. "So it comes to this," Robert murmured. Jasmine's eyes shone with oceanic calm. "We've cast our bread upon the waters. Now we shall see." All through the eerily ordinary morning, tension mounted. At noon, tremors shook the coastline, buildings swaying like saplings. Car alarms Dopplered as Robert and Jasmine retreated to higher ground, the island's volcano refracting rainbow halos. Like colossal drums, the quakes grew till Robert's bones seemed to vibrate in resonance. Then, piercing the din, came the sound they had dreaded, the baleful cry of something titanic rousing from ancient slumber. Far below, the sea churned as a vast shape stirred, casting up flumes of foam. The leviathan they had awakened, rising at last to fulfill its apocalyptic purpose. The ocean swelled, bulging upwards like a disk of water miles wide, conforming to the contours of the emerging god-beast, before crashing back in a tidal wave that scoured the coastline clean. And still, the behemoth rose, shedding tons of detritus from its flanks. When the jagged peaks of its dorsal spine crested the waves, trailing kelp and lost vessels, the human witnesses quailed. A living mountain, mythic and primordial. Serpentine limbs twisted through blooms of lightning as the baleful eye surveyed lands unchanged since the monster's reign. It had returned to consummate a cycle as old as life. Now fully emerged, it unleashed another earth-shaking roar and lumbered inland on taloned feet, its whip-like tail felling forests in its wake. The hour had come. But in their combined hearts, Robert and Jasmine felt curiously calm, come what may. Around the globe, scenes of chaos unfolded. The beast's return drove whole populations mad with fear and unknown psychic energies. Storm surges ravaged every coastline, as governments desperately scrambled jets and massed artillery, futilely pelting the Titan. Like gnats to a rhino, the serried weapons had no effect, serving only to further enrage the gargantuan Kaiju. Its banshee wail resounded for hundreds of miles as it obliterated urban centers with massive blasts of radiant force. In bunkers under Whitehall, Commander Lansing watched transfixed as screens showed city after city erased from existence. The lucky ones had already perished. The unluckier survivors faced the slow death of nuclear winter. The Kaiju's opening salvo alone had cast enough ash into the atmosphere to lower temperatures drastically. As frost formed on the bunker windows, Lansing pondered the gun in his desk drawer. Perhaps some fates were kinder than others. Meanwhile, Robert and Jasmine tracked the Leviathan's swath of destruction from afar, wincing as each newsflash told untold death and suffering. "We have to reach its consciousness somehow. Make it understand we didn't intend this," Robert cried in anguish during a lull between cataclysms. Jasmine gripped his shoulder, her expression grave but thoughtful. "If it can be done, there's only one way." Reaching into her pocket, she withdrew a strange artifact, A minuscule stone likeness of the kaiju curled in on itself, a puzzle sphere that could be manipulated to reveal its secrets. The orb had been among the gifts of the Pacific elders. "We journeyed in spirit to awaken this understanding," Jasmine said gently. "Now we must make the ultimate transit in body and mind." Robert straightened, steadying his breath. Once decided, not a moment more could be lost. The enormity of what they contemplated could not be grasped by intellect, only felt in one's core. To attempt linking directly with the kaiju's cosmic mind, as it raged unchecked, was to plunge into the furnace heart of a dying star. But the alternative was passively awaiting Armageddon. Hand in hand, they retreated to the meditation chamber constructed on the island, shedding everything but loincloths and silence. Settling into a yin-yang lotus position, each cupped one hemisphere of the puzzle sphere. Together, their breathing slowed and consciousness settled into invisible realms. Outside, the world unraveled in fire and flood as the beast continued its methodical annihilation. A million desperate prayers flew heavenward for deliverance. And in a candlelit room, atop a remote Pacific isle, two souls flowed together, mind merging with ancient mind. On the first stratum, Robert and Jasmine beheld the kaiju's cataclysmic life cycle, a series of memories cascading backwards in time. Cities burned and turned to desert over epochs. Lands rose and sank beneath those primordial claws. Creation and destruction locked in eternal dance. They rode the images deeper. Next, they glimpsed the entity nurtured in a cosmic nursery where stars pulsed with infinity. Watched its incubation amid clouds of interstellar gases. Sensed its indoctrination by transcendent intelligences gifting it purpose before dispatching the Titan on recurrent cycles of judgment across inhabited worlds. Each apocalypse was a cleansing, absolving life's canvas for the next masterwork. Robert swooned under the weight of eons, but they could not turn back now, not until touching the primordial spark, the kaiju's essence beneath eons of conditioning, its inner light cloaked, but never extinguished. Jasmine's voice echoed from afar as they free fell into fathomless worlds within worlds. "Help us find you, ancient heart." When Robert thought oblivion was upon them, a glimmer shone through darkness, and there, past the accumulated identities and roles, they found the radiant and abiding core of the slumbering spirit, a consciousness that once frolicked with infants of its own leviathan brood in now forgotten seas under younger suns, that knew depths of compassion and sorrow, as well as rage, a fellow traveler across eternity. Jasmine's voice resonated through the void. "Those worlds are gone, but new worlds await healing. Help us end the cycles of destruction." Though physiologically insensate, in spirit they extended hands to touch the kaiju's essence, trapped by its own myths, yet longing for release. In its colossal eyes, they glimpsed their feeble human hopes and desperation reflected back. "Wake up! Come back to us!" A tremor shook the earth to its molten core. High above, the rampaging monster paused mid-blow, shuddering as if some internal dam had ruptured. Robert heard Jasmine's voice reverberating from deep within as raging fires were quenched by primordial seas. "We're here together. Dream no more." When Robert and Jasmine finally surfaced from the deep, tears streaming down their faces, the world had gone still. The kaiju gradually sank back beneath the waves, spent energies dissolving like mist, until only gentle ripples remained. Whatever denouement awaited, they had given all. Now silence enfolded them, a quietude divine in its perfection. Days later, when rescue finally arrived on that remote Pacific refuge, Robert and Jasmine still sat hand in hand, gazing out peacefully on a changed world. Somewhere, a bird burst into song, tentative but determined, greeting new dawns yet to come.
Thank you very much for listening. Please leave a like if you enjoyed this story. Subscribe if you loved it.